What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a late-night set, expecting a normal interview, and instead gets blindsided by a host who thinks he can say whatever he wants? It only took 31 seconds of Greg Gutfeld running his mouth before the entire studio realized they were witnessing something that would go down in television history. Tom Hardy sat down in the guest chair across from Greg Gutfeld, relaxed and ready to talk about his latest film project. The audience clapped as the cameras rolled and the lights beamed down on the set. Everything seemed normal at first. Gutfeld had that smug smile plastered on his face, the one he always wore when he thought he was about to be clever. "So Tom, thanks for being here," Gutfeld started, leaning back in his chair like he owned the world. "I gotta say, I watched your new movie and I have some thoughts." Tom nodded politely. "Sure, I'd love to hear them." Gutfeld chuckled, glancing at his notes. "Well, first off, I'm wondering if you're aware that most of your movies are basically the same character. You know, the tough guy with the accent who grunts a lot. It's like watching the same performance over and over." The audience went quiet. Tom's expression didn't change, but there was a shift in his eyes. "I think each character I play has their own depth and background," he said calmly. "But I appreciate your perspective." Gutfeld wasn't done. He leaned forward, clearly enjoying himself. "Come on, be honest with me. How much of your career is just riding on the fact that you look intimidating? Because, let's face it, you're not exactly doing Shakespeare out here." Tom tilted his head slightly. "Actually, I've done quite a bit of classical theater. Shakespeare, Pinter, Mamet. I trained at the Drama Center, London." Right. Gutfeld waved his hand dismissively. "But that was ages ago. Now you're just cashing checks for playing the same brooding tough guy in every action movie. I mean, do you even read the scripts anymore, or do you just show up and flex?" The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few people gasped. Tom remained composed, but his jaw tightened slightly. "I take every role seriously," he said. "I work with the directors and writers to bring authenticity to each character." Gutfeld laughed, that sharp, mocking laugh that made it clear he thought he was being funny. "Authenticity? Tom, you played a guy who wore a mask for half a movie and people couldn't understand what you were saying. That's not authenticity. That's just bad audio." "Are you talking about Bane?" Tom asked, his voice still measured. "Yeah, Bane. That whole thing was ridiculous. You sounded like you were talking through a tube, and people pretended it was brilliant because, what, you got big for the role? Any actor can hit the gym, mate." Tom leaned forward slightly. "The voice was a creative choice that Chris Nolan and I developed together. It was meant to make the character unique and memorable." "Memorable?" Gutfeld scoffed. "It was a meme. The whole thing was a joke, just like half your filmography." The tension in the studio was thick now. Crew members exchanged worried glances. Tom's publicist, standing off to the side, looked like she wanted to intervene, but didn't know how. Tom sat back in his chair, studying Gutfeld with an intensity that would make most people uncomfortable. "You know what I find interesting," Tom said, his voice low and controlled, "is that you invited me here to talk about my work, but instead you're just taking shots for no reason." Gutfeld grinned wider. "Hey, I'm just being honest. Someone's got to say it. Hollywood's full of people blowing smoke, telling you everything's great. I'm giving you the truth." "The truth," Tom repeated slowly. "Or just your opinion dressed up as fact?" "Same thing." Gutfeld shrugged. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean, Tom. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You've made a career out of playing the same type of guy. The strong, silent type. And sure, it works. But is it really acting?" Tom's expression hardened. "So, let me get this straight. You think that because I've played physical roles, I'm not a real actor?" "I think you've found a niche and you're milking it," Gutfeld said. "Which is fine. Good for you. But let's not pretend it's some kind of artistic achievement." "Right," Tom said, his voice dropping even lower. "And what's your achievement exactly? Sitting behind a desk and insulting people for a living? The audience gasped again, louder this time. Gutfeld's smile faltered for just a second before he forced it back. Whoa, hey now. I'm just doing my job here, asking the tough questions. Tough questions? Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're not asking questions. You're being disrespectful for the sake of your own ego. Gutfeld tried to laugh it off. Come on, Tom. Can't you take a little criticism? I thought you were supposed to be tough. There's a difference between criticism and just being a jerk, Tom said, his voice steady but firm. You don't know me. You don't know the work I put in. You sit here and make assumptions based on what? Your own limited perspective? Gutfeld's face was turning red now. Limited perspective? I've been doing this for years. I know the industry. You know the industry. Tom's eyebrows went up. You talk about the industry from behind a desk. I live it. I work in it. I dedicate myself to every single project I take on. Oh, please, Gutfeld waved his hand again. Spare me the noble artist routine. You get paid millions to pretend to be other people. It's not exactly coal mining. Tom stared at him for a long moment. You really think that's what it is? Just pretending? Yeah, that's exactly what it is, Gutfeld said. And you're not even the best at it. You're just marketable. The studio fell completely silent. Even the cameramen seemed frozen. Tom slowly stood up from his chair, towering over the desk. Gutfeld's smile finally disappeared completely. You know what? Tom said quietly. I came here in good faith. I thought this was going to be a conversation, but you're not interested in a conversation. You just want to tear people down to make yourself feel bigger. Gutfeld tried to regain control. Tom, come on, sit down. We're just having a discussion here. No, Tom said firmly. We're not. You're having a monologue where you insult me and expect me to just sit here and take it. That's not a discussion. I'm the host, Gutfeld said, his voice taking on an edge. This is my show. Then host it by yourself, Tom replied. Because I'm done. Gutfeld stood up now too, clearly rattled. You're really going to walk off? Over a little bit of back and forth? A little bit of back and forth? Tom shook his head. You've done nothing but disrespect me since I sat down. You insulted my work, my choices, my career. And for what? To get a reaction? To look tough in front of your audience? I was just being honest, Gutfeld insisted, but his voice had lost its confidence. No, you were being cruel, Tom said. There's a difference. Honesty doesn't require you to be nasty. You can have an opinion without tearing someone down. Gutfeld tried to laugh, but it came out forced. Tom, buddy, you're being way too sensitive about this. Sensitive? Tom's voice rose slightly. You spend 20 minutes attacking everything I've ever done, and I'm sensitive for calling you out? The audience was dead silent, watching this unfold like a car crash. Tom's publicist finally moved toward the stage, but Tom held up a hand to stop her. You want to know what I think? Tom continued. I think you're insecure. I think you hide behind this persona of being the guy who tells it like it is. But really, you're just scared. Scared that if you're actually kind or respectful, people won't find you interesting. Gutfeld's face was bright red now. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Tom challenged. Because from where I'm standing, you invited me here just so you could try to make me look small. That's not journalism. That's not entertainment. That's just sad. This is ridiculous, Gutfeld sputtered. You can't just come on my show and attack me. Tom laughed. A real laugh this time. I'm attacking you? That's rich. You've been attacking me since the moment I sat down. I'm just finally responding. Gutfeld pointed at Tom, his hand shaking slightly. You need to sit down and finish this interview. Or what? Tom asked calmly. You'll insult me some more? Say more dismissive things about my career? No thanks. I have better things to do with my time. You're under contract to be here, Gutfeld said desperately. Tom shrugged. Sue me. The audience gasped again. Gutfeld looked around, clearly panicking, as he realized he was losing complete control of the situation. You can't just leave. We're live. I can, and I am, Tom said. He started to unclip his microphone from his shirt. Because I don't have to sit here and be disrespected. Not by you. Not by anyone. Gutfeld tried one more time. Tom, come on. Let's just reset. We got off on the wrong foot. Tom stopped and looked at him. Wrong foot? Greg, you insulted me repeatedly. You dismissed my work, my training, my entire career. You mocked me. And now you want to reset? I was just joking around, Gutfeld said weakly. No, you weren't, Tom said firmly. You were being mean, and you thought I'd just sit there and take it because that's what guests are supposed to do, right? Smile and nod while the host says whatever he wants? Gutfeld didn't respond. He just stood there, looking smaller by the second. Tom finished removing his microphone and set it on the chair. You know what the sad part is? I actually had respect for you before this. I thought you were smart, funny, but this is just bullying with a bigger platform. I'm not a bully, Gutfeld protested. Then what do you call what you just did? Tom asked. Because from where I'm standing, you used your position as host to attack someone who was just here to talk about their work. That's textbook bullying. The audience started to murmur, some people nodding in agreement. Gutfeld noticed, and his face grew even redder. The audience loved it. They were laughing. Were they? Tom gestured to the crowd. Because they looked pretty uncomfortable to me. Several audience members shifted in their seats, clearly not wanting to be part of this. Gutfeld looked around desperately, realizing Tom was right. Look, Tom said, his voice softening slightly. I get it. You have a show to do. You have a persona to maintain, but that doesn't give you the right to treat people like garbage. We're all just trying to do our jobs, man. Gutfeld opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Tom nodded, like that was the answer he expected. I'm going to go now, Tom said, and I hope you think about this. Think about how you treat people. Because one day, you're going to do this to someone who doesn't handle it as calmly as I did. You call this calm? Gutfeld tried to joke. Yeah, I do, Tom said, because if I really lost my temper, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. That statement hung in the air like a threat, even though Tom's voice remained level. Gutfeld took a small step back. Tom turned to the audience. I'm sorry you had to see this. I really am. You came here for entertainment, and instead you got, well, whatever this was. Several audience members started clapping. Then more joined in. Within seconds, half the audience was applauding Tom. Gutfeld looked horrified. Stop that, Gutfeld said to the audience. Stop clapping. But they didn't stop. If anything, the applause grew louder. Tom gave them a small nod of appreciation, then turned back to Gutfeld one last time. You should apologize, Tom said simply. Apologize? Gutfeld looked incredulous. For what? For being disrespectful. For insulting me. For wasting everyone's time with this circus. Gutfeld crossed his arms. I'm not apologizing. I didn't do anything wrong. Tom sighed, like he was dealing with a stubborn child. That's the problem, Greg. You don't even see it. You don't see how your words affect people. Or maybe you do see it, and you just don't care. Of course I care, Gutfeld said defensively. Then prove it, Tom challenged. Right now. Apologize? The audience fell silent again, everyone waiting to see what would happen. Gutfeld stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. His pride was clearly wrestling with his common sense. I'm waiting, Tom said. Gutfeld's face contorted. Fine. I apologize if you were offended. Tom shook his head. That's not an apology. That's you blaming me for being offended by your behavior." "What do you want me to say?" Gutfeld snapped. "I want you to take responsibility," Tom said. "Say you're sorry for being disrespectful. Mean it." Gutfeld looked around the studio, at his crew, at the audience, at the cameras still rolling. He was trapped, and he knew it. "I'm sorry for being disrespectful," he finally muttered. "Louder," Tom said, "so everyone can hear you." Gutfeld's jaw clenched. "I'm sorry for being disrespectful," he said louder, though the words clearly pained him. Tom studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, thank you." He turned to leave, but Gutfeld couldn't help himself. "You know, you're not as tough as everyone thinks you are." Tom stopped in his tracks. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. He slowly turned back around, and the look on his face made Gutfeld visibly flinch. "And you're exactly as small as I thought you were," Tom said quietly. That was the final blow. Gutfeld looked like he'd been punched. Tom didn't wait for a response. He walked off the stage, past the cameras, past the stunned crew members, and out the studio door. The audience erupted in applause again, louder than before. Gutfeld stood there alone on his stage, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly. He tried to smile, tried to laugh it off, but it was too late. The damage was done. "Well," he said weakly into his microphone, "that was unexpected." The audience had stopped clapping, but they weren't laughing at his joke. They just stared at him, waiting to see what he'd do next. He looked at his producers off stage, silently begging for help, but they just shrugged. This was his mess to clean up. "Let's go to commercial," Gutfeld finally said, his voice barely steady. As the cameras cut away, he slumped back into his chair, the reality of what just happened sinking in. He'd invited one of Hollywood's most respected actors onto his show and managed to drive him away in less than half an hour. And worse, he'd done it on live television in front of millions of viewers. The audience started filing out, many of them shaking their heads or whispering to each other. Gutfeld could only imagine what they were saying. His producers rushed over to him, all talking at once, trying to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show. But Gutfeld wasn't listening. He was staring at the empty chair where Tom Hardy had been sitting, replaying the entire conversation in his head. He'd thought he was being clever, edgy, entertaining, but instead, he'd just been mean. "Should we bring out the next guest?" one producer asked. Gutfeld shook his head. "Cancel them. Cancel everyone. I can't do this right now." The producers looked at each other in alarm. "Greg, we have a show to finish." "Then finish it without me," Gutfeld said, standing up. He pulled off his own microphone and tossed it on the desk. "I need a minute." He walked off his own stage, leaving his crew scrambling to figure out what to do. In the hallway backstage, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. He could still hear Tom's words echoing in his head. "You're insecure. You hide behind this persona. You're just scared." Was that true? Gutfeld had always prided himself on being tough, on asking the hard questions, on not backing down. But was there a line between being tough and being cruel? Had he crossed it tonight? He thought about Tom's composure, how calm he'd remained even as Gutfeld had attacked him, how Tom had given him multiple chances to back down, to reset, to be better, and how Gutfeld had wasted every single one of those chances because his ego wouldn't let him admit he was wrong. A crew member walked by and wouldn't make eye contact. Another whispered something to a colleague, and they both looked at Gutfeld before hurrying away. He could feel it already, the shift in how people were seeing him. This wasn't going to blow over. This was going to follow him. Back in the studio, the producers were trying to explain to the confused audience that there would be a brief delay. Some people were already leaving, not wanting to wait. Others were on their phones, probably already posting about what they'd just witnessed. Gutfeld pushed off the wall and walked toward his dressing room. He needed to think, to process, to figure out how to spin this. But deep down, he knew there was no spinning it. Tom Hardy had walked off his show because he'd been disrespectful, and everyone had seen it. He thought about Tom's last words. "You're exactly as small as I thought you were." Small. That word cut deeper than anything else. Because maybe that's what he was. Maybe all his bluster, all his confidence, all his sharp comments were just covering up the fact that he felt small. And tonight, someone had finally called him on it. His phone was already blowing up with messages from his agent, his producers, network executives. He didn't want to look at any of them. He knew what they'd say. "How could you let this happen? Do you know how bad this looks? What were you thinking? What had he been thinking?" That's the question Gutfeld couldn't answer. He'd had Tom Hardy, an A-list actor, a genuinely talented person, sitting across from him. And instead of having a real conversation, instead of being gracious and interesting, he'd decided to tear him down. Why? For ratings? For laughs? To prove something? Gutfeld sat down in his dressing room and looked at himself in the mirror. He looked tired. Older somehow. The adrenaline from the confrontation was wearing off, and all he felt now was empty. There was a knock on his door. "Greg, the network wants to talk to you." Of course they did. Gutfeld didn't respond. He just kept staring at his reflection, wondering how he'd become this person. The guy who drove Tom Hardy off his show. The guy who couldn't apologize properly, even when he knew he was wrong. The guy who valued his ego more than basic human decency. Another knock. "Greg, they're waiting." "Tell them I'll call them later," Gutfeld said quietly. They said it's urgent. Everything was always urgent. Every crisis, every mistake, every moment had to be dealt with immediately. But what Gutfeld needed right now wasn't to talk to network executives. It was to sit with what had happened. To really understand it. Tom Hardy hadn't yelled at him, hadn't cursed at him, hadn't gotten physical, despite probably wanting to. He just stood his ground, refused to be disrespected, and left. It was the most dignified exit Gutfeld had ever seen, and it made him look like a complete fool by comparison. The truth was, Gutfeld knew Tom was right about everything. He did hide behind his persona. He was insecure. He did use his platform to make himself feel bigger by making others feel smaller. And tonight, it had finally backfired in the worst possible way. His phone rang, then rang again, then again. Gutfeld turned it off and set it face down on the table. Whatever consequences were coming, they could wait a little longer. Right now, he needed to sit with the uncomfortable truth that Tom Hardy had forced him to face. He wasn't the tough guy who asked hard questions. He was just someone who'd forgotten how to be kind. And tonight, in front of millions of people, that fact had been exposed for everyone to see. The empty chair across from where he sat every night would haunt him. It represented everything he'd done wrong. Every cheap shot he'd taken. Every moment he'd chosen ego over empathy. And the worst part? He'd brought it all on himself.